The warden looked at J-Dorm, the haunted-looking edifice that was the death house, and sighed as if he would rather be anywhere else. Winter understood. She could think of very few places she wanted to be less than this place. He had made calls after securing the gate, giving orders that no one was to go in or out, and in 30 minutes he had 12 lean, mean fellas arrayed by the fence, with little badges that identified them as CERT team members, whatever that meant. They had empty holsters today. No weapons were allowed on the compound, outside of an emergency situation. They had the little black cans that all the officers carried, and some of them had tasers as well. It seemed a lot of effort for one man, but if he actually had what she'd seen, then she supposed they might need them. He turned away from the death house as one of the men came closer and whispered something to him, addressing the men as they stood respectfully. Even these guys, certified head knockers, knew better than to get on the wrong side of the warden of Stragview, it seemed. Gentlemen, I'm going to say this once, so listen up. A few of you have worked here before, and you know the reputation of J-Dorm. But for those who don't, we're going into the eye of hell. A few of them snorted, but the 3 or 4 of them who had worked here looked scared enough to crap masonry. They knew this place, and they knew its reputation. This place hasn't been opened since the last execution at Stragview. No one has set foot in this dorm since Alex Murphy died, and it's a strange place. We're going in to get Andrew Carmichael out, and when we have him, we're going to get out as quickly as we can. Someone towards the end of the line whistled a few bars of Ghostbusters, and some of the CERT guys laughed a little under their breath. The warden rounded on him, shutting them up in short order. You think this is a joke? I lost 5 men in this building a year ago. Do not go in there thinking this is a joke. This building and the things inside will eat you alive. Stay together. Don't go off by yourself, and we'll make it out alive. Lieutenant Rogers, arrange your men, and let's get this underway. They all had flashlights, the little tactical ones that you could stick on your belt when you weren't using them, and the warden handed Winter one of the big mag lights that you so often saw on security guards in movies. It looked thick enough to bash someone's brains in with, though Winter hoped she wouldn't have to use it for that. They all proceeded in, Winter and the warden taking up the back. Lieutenant Rogers went in first, and when he reached around to flip the switch, there was nothing but a dry click and a pop as several of the lights died. The others flickered for a moment, and then went dead. They were left with nothing but flashlights, and Rogers told the warden and Dr. Winters to stay here while they checked the housing area. The warden warned them again to be cautious, and they promised that they would. So, Winter asked, what's the deal with this place? It's not like you to be so worried about anything. The warden swung his flashlight around, looking in the corners for something, and not finding it. We did something we shouldn't have done, and now I've invited them in. We let a Trojan horse into the prison, and if it's in league with Jessie, then we might be in a lot of trouble. Who's this Jessie? Why are you so afraid of her? He bit his lip, another first, and seemed to contemplate how best to answer her. About 30 years ago, I did something unadvisable. He paused, looking sheepish. I took a lover. Winter snorted. Oh no, God forbid. It's not something I do often. Humans are not something I like to mingle with, but this one seemed different. She seemed more like us than her own kind, and for a time, we were content. Then she began to want more. Our father's always telling us how we need to spread our wild oats among the sheep, but when she came up pregnant, suddenly there was all of this talk about marriage and child support. It didn't help that she was utterly immune to my charms. Some of them are, you know, and refused to be swayed. I was finally forced to tell her that we had no future together, and she did not take it well. Winter nodded. I should think not. Did she get the courts involved? I think I would have heard if you had a paternity suit in the works. The warden shook his head. No. She responded by flinging herself from the tower you passed on the way here. Winter put a hand over her mouth. God! Over you? The warden shrugged. I suppose. This was back when the tower was infested with rats, too. She went in at night, and they found her on the ground inside the tower fence when the sun came up. Ever since, there have been whispers about a ghost named Jessie. She haunts the grounds. She haunts the dorms. She sows chaos from time to time, but only recently has she become a real problem. I'm a little afraid that my unborn child might have granted her some kind of otherworldly powers in the hereafter, but who's to say? There's a lot of vengeful spirits in this place, but she's the only one I have no real control over. Winter pursed her lips, digesting what he had said. You have control over ghosts? She asked suddenly. Ghosts were usually a little beyond them, being something different than their usual realm of expertise. Well, it's the same way I control some of the other things that take up residence here. It's more like I give them fences and let them hunt. It's within my power to destroy them, but it benefits me to have them here. They're like zoo animals. As long as my guests don't wander into their enclosure, they don't get eaten up. Winter was horrified, but she found herself nodding as well. It made a species of sense. So why haven't you destroyed Jessie if she's such a problem? Oh, I tried. More than once. She's resilient. Every time I banish her, she comes back. She's tied to this place in an unhealthy way, and I can't seem to be rid of her. So then, but the radio crackled, and Lieutenant Rogers reported that they had found nothing in the East housing area. We're coming back to check the offices in the West housing area before we go on to the killing floor. Copy, Lieutenant. Keep your eyes peeled for movement. Winter gave him a minute before starting again. So then what's so special about Alex Murphy? Wasn't he that serial killer who picked up hitchhikers? Yes, but it was what he befriended at the mental hospital that made him so dangerous. He befriended something from outside our understanding. Winter scoffed. What's outside our understanding? The CERT team came back up the hall, flashlights out, and staying in tight formation as they proceeded north into the office area. Winter quieted until they were out of earshot, and when she looked back at her brother, he seemed to be having difficulty getting it out. Do you remember anything Father said about the creatures from outside our reality? Winter nodded, ticking them off on her fingers as she recalled them. The pale lady, the green man, the bright, those shadow things. The gallery, the warden corrected. That's what he brought in with him. Winter was shocked. I didn't actually believe any of them were real. I just thought they were Father's paranoia working overtime. Do you mean to tell me that this gallery is real? Oh, they're real, all right. I've been keeping them pinned up here since they escaped during the execution. The bastard let them loose with his dying breath, and they've been trying to get into the prison ever since. These things would play merry hell inside the grounds, worse than Jessie ever could, and I like the idea of them teaming up about as much as I like the idea of Father knowing I wasn't able to contain them. Winter started to poke fun at him, but she understood. Her brother had always been the favorite, the golden child, and he didn't want Father to be disappointed in him. She wished that she could make him believe that Father's approval wasn't the most important thing there was, but she knew he wouldn't listen. He had always craved their father's attention, and he would have been the hardest of their siblings to convince that his love was not something they could obtain. She supposed they were all likely on Earth somewhere. That was the nature of their kind. But Winter had no real desire to see any of them. She was the oldest of her father's daughters, the first to leave, and she had never been very close with any of them. She would have gone right on avoiding them if her brother hadn't gone and spoiled it. "Office is clear. We're proceeding to the west housing area and the killing floor." Winter jumped a little, having forgotten about the radio, and as the warden keyed it up and acknowledged, he sighed deeply. "I was really hoping he would be in one of the cells, maybe in the office somewhere, trying to fight the urge to go to her. But I suppose I know where we would find him. We need to go with them as they proceed. I have a feeling he's made his way to the killing floor already." Winter nodded, and as the CERT team came back around, the two not-quite-humans fell in behind them. They moved with precision, though Winter doubted that this was what they had been trained for. She wondered if any of them would have to die today. She hoped not. She was tired of watching people die for things they didn't really understand. Things like the byplay of gods and the often difficult-to-understand conflict between beings outside their understanding. Most of these men likely wanted nothing more complex than to go home, eat dinner, and fall asleep in their own beds with someone they loved. Pamela wanted the same thing, though Winter doubted it would be something that could be achieved, not without some kind of conflict. The cells in the western housing area yawned open like hungry mouths as they passed up the hall. These were more like the cells people saw in movies, the deep cells that stretched into the concrete with a bed and a toilet and a metal door with a single window that looked out. The inmates would have all that room to themselves, too, and Winter bet that many of the inmates in the facility would have killed for accommodations like this. Most of those who got to live in them had done just that, she reminded herself, and as they cleared each of the cells, they proceeded to the killing floor. She hadn't felt it before now, but as she walked up that hallway, Winter felt a strange sense of being watched. The shadows around the top of the doorway looked too thick. The darkness that permeated the corners of those cells was too substantial, and Winter could feel something pressing at her. It was different from the totem that she had seen in her vision, the difference between grabbing something cold and touching a hot stove, but it still made her wince whenever that regard settled on her. Was this what her brother had feared? Was this what had terrified the warden of Stragview? She didn't know, but she suspected that it was. She felt something different as she came into the room that served as the killing floor, and that prickling felt more natural. This was the feeling of hairs rising on the back of your neck. This was how she knew something otherworldly was in there, and when the CERT team began to hesitate, Winter figured that they had found what they were looking for. "Warden, there's someone in there." The warden pushed his way through the group, Winter following in his wake. She had a front row seat for the large man in the gray uniform as he tried his best to get into what had been the little room where they put the needles in their charges. The windows in the little room were completely black, a deep midnight existing behind them, and the longer she looked, the more Winter thought it might be moving. The man by the door, that hulking bruiser with his sleeves pushed up to reveal his tattoos, was sweating and grunting as he tried to push his hand closer to the door. The idol was glowing, pulsating with a soupy light, but whatever barrier her brother had raised seemed to be holding him at bay. I can't reach it," he growled through clenched teeth, and as Winter watched, she saw a translucent figure appear behind him. The figure put her hand over his, the small and delicate fingers looking comical beside his bunched and hairy knuckles, and as she gave him her power, the hand moved a little closer to the door. This, it seemed, was the mysterious Jessie. Pamela had to admit that her brother had taste. The woman was waifish in a way that made Winter think death had not shrunk her, and her long silver hair flowed down around her like a river. She was dressed in a long blue garment that looked like it had started life as a sheet, and when she noticed them, the specter hissed at the warden as if to tell him to stay away. Lieutenant Rogers made to enter, but the warden put a hand out. "Take your men up the hall. As soon as I deal with her, I'll call you, and you can come escort Sergeant Carmichael away." "Sir, are you sure that's—" "I don't have time to argue with you. Do as I say, Lieutenant." Rogers nodded, though he seemed unsure as to why. He told his men to back up and pulled the door closed as the warden and Dr. Winters stepped onto the killing floor. Carmichael looked worried for half a heartbeat, but when she touched his face and turned him back to the door, he looked totally at peace again. Jessie, it seemed, knew how to get men to do what she wanted, and death hadn't stopped her from getting her way. "Why did you bring them if you were just going to send them out?" Winter hissed as they approached. "Witnesses," her brother breathed. "Carmichael is a normal person, and he needs normal people to bring him to justice." The meaning wasn't hard for Winter to figure out. "Jessica," the warden began. "No, you don't get to use that name. Call me what you used to call me when we were together. You created me, after all, so why not use the name you gave me before you killed me?" Winter expected him to try to deny it, but he just shrugged. "Jessie, then, whatever this is, it's over now. You know you can't stand against me. You know I'll scatter you again, and you'll be nothing but vapor until you can form again." Jessie gritted her teeth in a painful rictus. "That's true, but I know something you can't stand against. You're so afraid of them that you locked them away, or so you thought." The warden snorted, shaking his head as he walked towards the sergeant and took hold of his wrist. It broke loud enough to echo across the small room, and he caught the totem as it fell towards the ground. "And you would have gotten away with it, too, if you'd only started a little earlier." Sergeant Carmichael took a swing at him with his free hand, but the warden caught it and tossed him easily aside. He went sprawling in a heap on the concrete, breathing in little gasps as he held his wrist. He looked confused, and when Winter bent beside him and put a hand on his temple, he flinched away. "Don't," he breathed. "Don't you—" But as her hand slid into his temple, Winter was already riffling through his memories of what had happened. Jessie had gotten her hooks into him about a year ago, while she was drawing life force from some of the inmates in the prison, and it had been all too easy to bring him under her sway. He had helped her recruit more, helped her grasp the tattered ends of her former followers, and now Jessie had a cult even larger than before. As Carmichael fell, Winter heard someone cry out pitifully. She turned to find the warden pressing the ghost girl against the side of the death house, the specter twisting and writhing as he looked at Winter. "I need one more thing before our business is completed. Take her memories and leave her to drift." Winter was frozen for a moment, unsure she could even do such a thing. "Brother, spirit memories are different than human memories. Ghosts are made of memories, and I'm not even sure I can—" "Stop talking about it and come do it. This little bitch has been a thorn in my side for too long, and I'm tired of dealing with this spiteful jade." Winter thought about it. She really did. But as she watched the two together, she began to realize that her brother wasn't the only victim here. "She said you killed her," Pamela said, staring daggers at her brother as the spirit tried to rake him with phantom fingers. "What did she mean?" The warden rolled his eyes. "She would say anything to justify what she's done. She's a spiteful harpy, trying to— Did you kill her?" The warden sighed theatrically. and the sound came out more exasperated than disgusted. "I've killed lots of people, sweet sister. You've killed lots of people. We kill people sometimes. They learn what we are. They threaten to tell people. They threaten to go to people who could send us back from whence we came. So we end them. She was only going to live for a few decades. What's her life, her child's life, next to mine?" Pamela had heard enough. She turned, heading for the door. "Sister, I'll bill you. You have your rock, you have your traitor. Deal with the loose ends yourself. It's what you're best at, after all. If you leave..." But she turned and raked him with a stare. "I have completed our bargain. Now take out your own trash. Whatever check you send me better not bounce either. Otherwise I'll come back, and my collection process will make your little girlfriend's power play look like a bag of flaming shit on your doorstep." She left then. Left her brother holding his ex-lover. Left the rotten stench of Strag view behind. She had already decided to burn this pantsuit and get a new one. She'd never be able to wash the taint of this place off her. Not with 1,000 washings. He'd be back. He always came back. But she hoped it would be another century before she saw him or any of her other siblings again. Maybe she should go get some therapy, she thought with a little chuckle as she walked past the stunned members of the CERT team. Perhaps it was time to get her own closure and put the dysfunction of her own family behind her. Maybe she'd even use the money from her brother's check to pay for it. Wouldn't that just be so poetic? Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. I genuinely hope you've enjoyed Dr. Winters and her byplay with her brother, the warden, as she explores Stragview Prison. Few places in my own written universe are more dear to me than Stragview, as strange as that will sound. It may come as a shock to some of you, but a lot of the best stories I've ever written were written while I sat behind a desk at my own version of Stragview Prison, though it's a little less grand than the one I write about in these tales. I've made no secret about my choice in career paths, though what you're currently listening to is what I'm hoping to turn into my career path. Like and subscribe and become a member. But I owe so much of the horror that I write to nights spent sitting in confinement, or waiting with an inmate at the hospital, or just sitting down in my own medical wing and listening to inmates beat and bang and bemoan their fate. I honestly wondered if I would ever love a series as much as I love Stragview, but when I wrote about Dr. Pamela Winter and her strange little clinic, I found that I really fell in love with the idea of a therapist that could reach into your mind and find the root of your problem. It's been such a joy to find the two were linked, to find Pamela Winters living in the shadow of Stragview, to find the Appalachian grandpa that you all love so much, living a stone's throw from Kashmir. That's right, he's not quite as far off as you might think. There's also the mysterious hospital, and very recently the Kashmir Botanical Gardens, which may house one of those bugaboos that Dr. Winter wasn't even sure existed. Kashmir and the surrounding area are so dear to me, and it means a lot for me to share it with you. I appreciate you all so much for coming back week after week and listening to my silly little stories. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for everything that you do. Alright, I'll stop getting sentimental. Before we go, let's go ahead and thank our patrons. Thanks to Civ Garstad for being our Spooky Ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, and Saikat for being our Spooky Skeleton contributors. And thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Sarah ASMR 42, and Bella Lee for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks to you all. It means so much to me that you would give your hard-earned money to my silly little story channel. From the bottom of my heart, thank you all. However you contribute to the channel, thank you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.